Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror franchise review video. As part of my series where I'm taking a look at all the Insidious movies in the franchise and reviewing them and then ranking them before the fifth one comes out in about a month from now. So today we're going to take a look at Insidious Chapter 2, which I have on this four pack here. Of course, the first one I have on Blu ray. And I also reviewed that one. It's up on my channel if you want to check it out. But today we're going to talk about and review Insidious Chapter 2 from 2013. So I could say this is the first time I'd ever seen this movie. I only saw the original once before watching it for review on this series. But this one I haven't, as well as the ones after this, I haven't watched or seen at all. So I really knew nothing about them. So that being said, let's just go ahead and get into it. So, Insidious Chapter 2 is a 2013 American supernatural horror film directed once again by James Wan. The film is a sequel to the 2010 film Insidious and the second installment in the Insidious franchise and fourth in terms of the series and story chronology. Back are characters Josh and Renee Lambert, a husband and wife who seek to uncover the secret that has left them dangerously connected to the spirit world. So we start in 1986. Lorraine Lambert summons demonologist Elise Rayner to help her son Josh, who is being haunted by the spirit of an old woman. While searching for any while searching for any paranormal phenomena in the home, Elise's arm is slashed by an unseen force. She insists that they must suppress Josh's astral projection abilities for his own safety and plant altered memories in his brain. 25 years later, Josh's wife, Renee Lambert, is under questioning about the death of Elise. She is warned that if Josh's fingerprints are found at the crime scene, he will be prosecuted for Elise's murder. Josh, Renee, and their children, Dalton, Foster, and Callie, relocate to Lorraine's home where they again begin to encounter strange paranormal events. Dalton tells his mother that he has been having bad dreams about a woman in a white dress, as well as hearing Josh talk to an unseen figure. Renee receives a call from the police stating that the fingerprints do not match that of Josh's. A woman in a white dress attacks Renee, and Josh hears a voice urging him to kill his family. So that's the setup and the premise, the beginning of the movie. As far as the cast goes, it's much of the same cast as the original movie, which is nice for continuity purposes. We have Rose Byrne as Renee Lambert, Patrick Wilson as Josh Lambert, Ty Simpkins as Dalton Lambert, Lynn Shay as Elise Rayner, Barbara Hershey as Lorraine Lambert, um, Lee Winnell as Specs, and Angus Sampson as Tucker. Those are all returning actors and actresses to returning characters. And then some new characters or new performers that we have. We have Stephen Coulter as Carl, Joyce Lynn Donahue as young Lorraine. So yeah, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for Insidious Part Two here. I don't know how well you guys can see that part of this four pack from 2013. So yeah, first time watching this movie, and overall I enjoyed it. I thought this was a very solid sequel to the original Insidious movie. So let's just go ahead and get into it, starting with the things that I liked about Insidious Chapter 2. I thought they did a really good job as a sequel, picking up right where things left off from the first movie, much like Halloween 2 does, although maybe not quite that well, but kind of in that same vein. I thought there was a great transition from the two movies being made 3 years apart, but you wouldn't know it if you watch these movies back to back. It really has a good transition from a sequel standpoint. So I really enjoyed that and the continuity as it relates to that with all the returning characters played by the same people. Once again, I thought the performances are really solid across the board, especially by Patrick Wilson in this movie, who has a lot more to do than the first movie. He kind of plays a dual, his good normal good guy self as well as like a bad spirit role. And I thought he really knocked it out of the park in this movie. Thought he did a really good job. Also, Rose Byrne and Lynn Shay are really solid as they were in the first movie and this movie. Although I will say Rose Byrne's not in the movie as much. You get a lot more Barbara Hershey as Lorraine Lambert in this movie on screen than you do Renee Lambert, played by Rose Byrne. And I like Barbara Hershey, so that wasn't a bad thing, just kind of a trade off there. But um, she's, for as much as she's in the movie, Rose Byrne is still really good in it, I thought. I really loved how they tied events in this movie to certain scenes and things that happened in the first movie so well, explaining how certain things happened in certain scenes. Just very clever and effective. Lee Winnell deserves a tremendous amount of credit for his writing. I don't know if it's a case where he knew they were going to be making a second movie, so he wrote the first movie with that in mind already, or if he took a look at the first movie when he found out that a sequel was in the works, and how could he tie that in? But however he did it, it was phenomenal. Really good job. One of my favorite parts about this sequel is how they tied into the first movie certain scenes that I'm not going to give away, but things happen in the first movie that we now have it explained to us why and how that happened. So yeah, that was one of my favorite aspects about this movie. I like the exploration of Josh as a young boy. We hear about it the third act of the first movie. In this movie, we actually get to see some of that, how he develops his astral projection abilities and how that fits into the latter third of the original movie and how it fits into this movie as well. Like I said, there's a lot of nice, not a lot of nice tie-ins and a lot of nice uh, woven scenes, woven storyline between these two movies. So I really like that and that exploration we get of him as a kid. James Wan again does a really good job of building tension and suspense in certain scenes in this movie. Great directing in this movie with the use of good sound production and images that he uses. Um, the movie has more of a mystery aspect to it, I feel like, than the first movie did, which I really enjoyed and was really engaged in as a viewer in this movie. Um, yeah, I was very interested to see how it unfolded, how it all unfolded, and how it was going to play out. Sort of that mystery aspect that we get here, where several of the characters are sort of trying to solve things that happened in the past and how it's pertaining to what's going on now. There's a group of characters from this movie that are kind of going to different locations, a hospital, a house, another house, and kind of trying to tie it all together while still using sort of a seance to try to talk to people that have either passed on or the paranormal world. I thought that all worked pretty well for the most part. Um, Excellent cinematography throughout the movie. It looks fantastic with the camera work, the use of images that we see on screen, and just the overall look and quality. I would say it's just as good as the first movie. In some ways, maybe even better in certain scenes. So that was definitely something that stood out. Once again, I think great atmosphere is created throughout this movie by James Wan, by those visuals I was talking about, and the cinematography and the sound. It connects well to the first movie. And then my final pro is I think the comedy that they tried to inject in the first movie, and it really didn't work as well for me. I think the comedy that they inject here works a bit better for me in this movie. Part of that is due to sort of a difference in tone. Like the first movie was very, very dreary, very dark. This movie still got those dark elements to it, but it's also the tone isn't. I don't feel like it's quite as dark. It's a little bit more cheesy, a little bit more lighter. Well, not being a comedy or anything like that, but the tone's just not quite as heavy as the first movie, and so I think part of that, I think the comedy works a little better, and the fact that again they don't go over the top with the comedy. The comedy basically comes from Specs and Tucker again, just like it did in the first movie. Sort of the two assistants there. And I just thought it played better into the flow and the tone in this movie than it did the first movie. So I wanted to mention that as a pro. So yeah, those are my pros for Insidious Chapter 2. As far as cons go, that I'll get into now, I think the story definitely becomes more cheesy and kind of out there. As a viewer, we're definitely asked to suspend disbelief a lot more in this movie. Not that the first movie was completely realistic, everything that was happening with the further and paranormal stuff that was going on. But in this movie, it really kind of goes over the rails a little bit. So yeah, we're asked to suspend disbelief and just kind of go with what's being said and what's being explained. Don't question it, just go with it. But there is more of that you run into, like, does that really make sense, or what are they talking about with this term? And there's more of that than there was in the first movie. It's overall the story's just not as grounded as the first movie. Now that being said, Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne and their characters still ground this movie enough where it's not a comedy or it's not completely over the top, but the story was more out there. And but because of their performances and the returning characters, it still remains somewhat grounded. But that's just something that I needed to bring up as a con. The movie isn't generally the movie isn't as genuinely scary as the first movie was. While there certainly are creepy scenes and moments in this movie, they rely a bit more on jump scares and sort of predictable scares, although still not full scares. I'll give them credit for that, but it just doesn't have the same iconic scares and skin crawling tension that the first movie did. At least not for me. Maybe it does for other people. Part of that's related to the fact that the final villain, who in the first movie, of course, was the red faced demon. In this movie, it's a woman in white. That's as much as I'll say. But she's just not nearly as iconic or scary as the red faced demon from the first movie was. And therefore, the movie just doesn't have that heavy, just doesn't have the scares that the first movie had in terms of weight from a horror standpoint. At least it didn't to me. Again, I want to preface this because I'm sure a lot of people out there that watch this will still find it really scary. But I didn't as much as the first movie, and I think that villain has a lot to do with it. Though it was interesting where the villain comes from and how it all sort of fits into the first movie. From a horror standpoint, just wasn't quite as effective for me. They don't really explore the further in this movie as much either, and it doesn't look quite as good as it did in the first movie. You see the further more towards the end, the third act of this movie, which is fine, but even when you're in it, it's not quite as detailed. It's not quite as well done in terms of the makeup and practical effects that we get, the creature effects and the paranormal effects that we got in the first movie. Overall, it just wasn't quite as memorable as in that first movie. One thing I really didn't like in this movie is the dubbing that they used in the opening scene, particularly as it related to the character of Elise. So the movie opens in 1986, so about 25 years before current times. Um, so we get a young Lynn Shays character, a young Elise, but they still use Lynn Shays' voice coming out of this young actress. And it really just doesn't jive very well at all. And I thought it was unnecessary and kind of took me out of it a little bit, if I'm being honest about it. I just don't really know why they did it, why they just couldn't have this young actress use her voice. And I think they also did that with Carl's character as well, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe even, I can't remember if they did that with Lorraine's character or if that was Joycelyn Donahue. That she didn't talk that much, so I don't really remember if they used Barbara Hershey to try to voice over. But I know they did for sure for Lynn Shay, and that wasn't necessary in my opinion. And then my final con is one that you hear a lot in a lot of horror movie reviews, and that's plot contrivances and more so plot conveniences. Um, the characters are able to figure things out a little faster than I think is necessarily realistic, especially as they're doing this mystery thing. Certain characters just connect dots a lot faster and a lot easier given the content of the story here than I necessarily think it's reasonable for a viewer to just go along with. Again, you have to suspend disbelief and go along with it to make this work, but it's a little harder to do in this movie. That's the best way to say it. There's definitely some plot contrivances and conveniences, but yeah, overall, guys, that's my thoughts and review for Insidious Chapter 2. Overall, I still really enjoyed this movie. I think it is I think it's one of the better done sequels, horror sequels, because a lot of times horror sequels tend to range anywhere from okay to bad. This one I would say is pretty good. I think it's a really solid horror sequel. That's biggest problem is that it's in comparison to the first Insidious movie. And that's where it runs into problems because anytime you try to make those comparisons, it's up against it right from the jump. But that being said, I really enjoyed this. It's more of a, as I said, it's more of a cheesy, not quite as heavy horror movie as the first one was. But there's still a lot of fun to be had here, and there's still some scares to be had here. You get the returning characters, so the performances are good once again, and you still have Lee Winnell and James Wan involvement, which definitely comes across here. So yeah, I really enjoyed this movie, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's a good horror sequel. I really do, and I enjoyed Insidious Chapter 2 from 2013. So, 8 out of 10 as far as my rating for the movie goes. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys think of Insidious Chapter 2. Did you like it as much as the first movie? Not as much as a movie overall? Why not? Comment down below. Please like this video and hit the little notification bell as well so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for this series. And please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my great horror content, not only this series, but what I have coming out on my channel over the next several months after. So, yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this Insidious franchise review series. I hope everybody's doing well and stay scared. Bye.